On today's show, it's our Rockets midseason review part 1 as we take a look at Ime Udoka's coaching and some of the frustrations that Rockets fans are feeling this season, as well as the polarizing approach to Reed Sheppard's role. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What is up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, now the #1 sports podcast network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, we've got part 1 of our 3-part mid-season Rockets review series. On today's show, we're going to be diving into coaching with Ime Udoka at the helm, some of the frustrations that Rockets fans are feeling with this team this season. We'll take a look at the offense, the defense, as well as the polarizing approach to Reed Sheppard's role on the team so far this season. Going to get into all of that on today's show. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. And joining us now for our Rockets midseason review plus grades breakdown is, of course, your trio of weekly co-hosts. We've got diehard Rockets fan and NBA draft expert Madison Moore. We've got host of the B-Block podcast and Sports Radio 610's Brandon Scott. And, of course, the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Rockets Launch Pod, Ben DuBose. You can track them all down on social media, all that good stuff. Guys, we are exactly 43 games, just over the midway point through this Rockets season. Rockets sitting at 27-16 on the year in the 4th seed of the Western Conference. And this team has been under a lot of scrutiny as of late. It's kind of that tumultuous point in the season where maybe every NBA team feels like they need to fire and move on from their head coach, and they're frustrated and disappointed. And I think there's only like 2 teams in the NBA that are happy, maybe the Pistons and the Thunder, if that. Let's start with the coaching for this Rockets team, because I feel like that's been the most hot button issue as of late when discussing this team is what Ime Udoka and company are doing, how they're approaching certain game plans, how they're utilizing certain players. And so I think that's a good kind of springboard for us to kind of discuss this Rocket season up to this point. Let's start with you, Ben. As far as just your general takeaway on kind of how Ime Udoka has approached this team and this season, where are your thoughts at with Ime at this point?
Are you asking me to give a grade?
You can give the grade at any point when you're talking about Ime. You can start with the grade. You can do the grade at the end. You can present your argument and then come however you want to handle it. We will get to the grade at some point.
Okay, I'll start with it. I'll go B-. I think when you look at the overall results, a B is fair. They're on pace to win 52, 53 games, roughly in line with last year, be in the top 4 of the West, and they've had some marquee wins. So it's certainly not a failure by any means. But at the same time, when you look at how close they are to being better than the current win pace, they're 1-5 in overtime games. And you've seen a lot of consistent themes when they fall short. Now, that's somewhat counteracted by the fact that you've had some marquee wins, most notably against the Pistons on Friday night, the likes of which you didn't have a year ago. So they do have the extra gear with Kevin Durant as your tip of the spear scorer. You know, the Rockets gave up a little bit of their floor when they sent Dillon Brooks and Jalen Green to Phoenix in exchange for a higher ceiling of Kevin Durant as your go-to guy. And so some of those flagship wins, like the Pistons the other night, like the Nuggets, you can see what the thinking was. And I think overall, it's tough to say this season is a failure, and you grade a head coach based on the success or failure of the team. So I think you have to sort of start with a B when you look at the record. But the reason I'm going B-, I do think that the lack of execution in close games and also the defense, Ime Udoka is a defense-first coach, and this year's defense has been okay, but it hasn't been great. They're 10th in defensive rating in January. They're 7th for the season overall. And there are some extenuating circumstances for sure. I mentioned that they traded Dillon Brooks to the Suns. You lost Fred VanVleet before the season started. Now you're without Steven Adams. So a lot of those veterans, those culture setters aren't there. And you didn't have Dorian Finney-Smith until Christmas. He's still minutes limited. Tari has been in and out of the lineup. So there are personnel reasons, but you would like to think that with Ime Udoka as a top shelf defensive coach that you could overcome those. And it's not that they haven't. They have to an extent, but it's good, not great. And so if I was looking just at the record, I would say B, but I feel like I've got to dock them a little bit for the lack of success in close games and the side of the ball that Ime specializes in, which is the defense, taking a little bit of a step back. Not a major dock. That's why I'm only going from B to B minus, but I do think at least to this point, I think that's a fair grade. Hopefully it improves over the second half of the year as they have more of their key defensive players available, most notably Tari, Eason, and DFS. But for now, based on the results we've seen, I'm at B minus.
Madison?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ben. I know there's been much talk about the crunch time play, which has been an issue. But more importantly, I think the biggest issue is the step back the team has taken defensively this year. Now, you can put that on the loss of Fred and Dillon Brooks, but to me, what I think there's a loss of is not just attention to detail, but the challenge of guarding your guy, right? The getting up for the challenge to guard these players every night. Last year, this team was so fun, not because of its offense, but because of the intensity they played on defense every single night. And there's just been stretches throughout games, throughout times of the season, even in the crunch time sometimes, where this team has just not paid enough attention to detail, not been physical enough. And those things, I think, at the end of the day, scheming matters, right? But effort is the all and be all. And I expect Ime Udoka to get the most out of his teams defensively, to inspire them through their effort, to really pull guys into the office and say, hey, your defensive performance has just been mediocre compared to what you're capable of, right? This is the type of defender I need you to be. This is what I need you to go out there and do for the team. We needed to really address the emotional leadership defensively on this team. And I think there are several candidates on this team that can be emotional leaders defensively. We watched Jabari Smith kind of be that just in the Detroit game, right? The not back down. It inspires your team to play with effort, with onus, right? And that starts from the top. Ime Udoka these are young players trying to find their place in the league most of the time, especially guys like Jabari Smith, Tari, Eason, Thompson. All of these guys have a nasty streak in them. You know what I mean? And I've expected Ime Udoka to pull those guys to the side and say, hey, this is what I need from you. I need this type of physicality, this type of non-back down to get not only inspire yourself, but to inspire your teammates. And I think that's my biggest issue so far with this team. And I think this team will be, a lot better if they had that level of intensity that they had last year.
B. Scott?
Yeah, I agree with all of the analysis that I've heard so far. I just disagree with the grade. I'm going to be a little bit harsher of a grader than both of you and go C+. And I really want to go lower than that, to be honest, but I also want to be fair. You know, the Rocket fan in me and all of us probably do this at every game that wants to cuss at about 5 or 6 different things that happen in a game. That part of me wants to go lower. But since we're doing this, we're trying to be rational minded, I'm going to go C+ because I want to be fair to the record. I want to be fair to the overall success of the team so far this year. But I do feel like in this grade for Ime Udoka, and this might become a theme for a lot of guys as we go through this episode, but I feel like the first 20 games of the season is doing a lot of work.
Yeah.
Doing a lot of work in the overall grade because the last, let's call it month and a half, since going back to early December was a rough month. And January hasn't been great. I know they've won the majority of their 4 of the last 5 games or whatever it is.
5 out of 7.
5 out of 7.
And that's why, by the way, I would have gone, if you had asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have gone C or C+ based on the regression. The fact that they've won 5 of their last 7 with a couple of marquee wins against the Spurs and the Pistons. That's why I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Your points on the overall arc of the season are valid. It's just I am adjusting a little bit for the uptick we've seen the last 2 weeks.
And I think all of that is fair, because if you do the last couple of weeks and you do the first 20 games of the season, you got a much higher grade. But then if you the debate comes in once you sandwich in between the December and then the early parts of January that were just honestly rough. And let's stick with this theme of defense, what you guys are talking about. I have been disappointed to see the lack of Madison, both of you guys, Madison and Ben mentioned attention to detail. No, Madison, you did for sure. The attention to detail, I would point out, this is a kind of, I guess, the same thing, the lack of focus. Attention to detail and lack of focus at various points of the season has been what really has disappointed me. And especially on the defensive end of the floor, you expect for an Ime Udoka team to just be flat out, because it's not a schematic thing. Like, think about the other night, the Detroit game where they make the adjustment against Jalen Dorian, where they got him in these odd switches and he's not really able to operate in the pick and roll. They got him the wrong Thompson twin doing the pick and roll and like, to me, that was a good schematic. That was Ime Udoka in a defensive savvy schematic moment right there. And kind of you can point to that and say, man, yeah, this guy really is legit when it comes to defense. So, but it's not a schematic thing. It's that effort or I should say the attention to detail and focus that you guys were talking about that has really left so much to be desired. So I thought you made a good point, Ben, about them sending out some of their floor to increase the ceiling in the Kevin Durant trade and jettisoning Jalen Green and Dillon Brooks. I anticipated that they would miss Dillon Brooks, but they had so much still remaining here. And one of those things being Ime Udoka himself, that I expected, if there was going to be a slight drop off, for it to only be slight. And let's not pretend like it's fallen off a cliff, but to be kind of a middling defense, kind of okay. And again, the beginning part of the season is doing a lot of work that makes them, I think, probably slightly above average. But overall, to be a middling defense, that part has been disappointing. Now, that's just the defense, the side of the ball or the end of the floor that Ime Udoka is supposed to specialize in. I ain't even got to the offense part yet.
We're going to get to the offense for sure, because that's been a big issue.
And we can put a pin in it, and let's just say that's the part that I think really brings the grade down. I can give them credit overall as a team for being in the space that they're in. They're right about close to where you would expect them to be, somewhere in the top four. You know, they're the fourth seed right now. You'd want them to be top three. So as a team, they're right around where you would expect them to be. But there are some holes in the game, especially with their offensive execution. I was making some jokes before we even started our stream here, or before we started recording, about how just discombobulated, and maybe not discombobulated, it's not the right word, but it's definitely it definitely leaves a lot to be desired. I'll quote Kelly Eco, one of our friends from formerly of The Athletic, now Yahoo. In a recent piece, he called it lethargic, inefficient, and mistake prone, which I thought was a very good way to put it, and I would just co-sign that.
Coming up, we keep our midseason conversation rolling along. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. Right now, the Seattle Seahawks are minus 4.5 favorites against the Patriots. You've got Sam Darnold as plus 125 to win Super Bowl MVP, and plenty more odds to get in on. So if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. Let's go ahead and dive back into our conversation now.
And to put a bow on this discussion of offense versus defense, because I think there's a lot of overlap, the solution for a lot of the offensive issues, especially late in games, is more Reed Sheppard. We saw him close out against the Pistons and look good. But the reason he hasn't always closed out, you can tell there's a reluctance to trust the Reed and Sengun lineups defensively in high leverage spots. So they pulled Reed. We saw this late in the Philly game. Well, it's your job as a top shelf defensive head coach, figure it out. And maybe they're starting to, they did against the Pistons, but I feel like offensively, the solution for a lot of these issues is more Reed Sheppard, but they haven't turned to that in super high leverage possessions all that frequently because of the concerns defensively. Well, that's where you need your coach to figure it out. And maybe he is, but he hasn't done it yet.
Yeah.
You know, I've in hearing a lot of what we've discussed, at least especially on the defense side of the ball, I feel like the analysis can be boiled down to
they're not getting after it like they're supposed to.
Had to break out an oldie but a goodie. You know, I agree with you know, the points that Madison was making, especially about the effort, because you know, you hear all the time, right? So much about defense is just about pride and effort and how much you actually care, right? That's one of the reasons that some of the bottom feeder teams, right, they don't look great defensively, because it's hard to find that motivation when you know that you're not competing for anything in a given season, right? You're just trying to make it to the end of the year without getting hurt, you know, for some of these lottery teams. What I will say is, looking at this Rockets team defensively, I think my expectation for an Ime Udoka-led team and an Ime Udoka-led defense in particular is not just for them to be good. It's for them to be the aggressors defensively. And they haven't been that hardly at all this season, right? There's been maybe a couple little pockets, a few games here and there where you feel the Rockets really imposing their will on another team defensively. Think about how many games they won last season solely off the backs of their defense, right? The offense was worse than it is this year because no Kevin Durant, LOL. But like, they won so many games last year exclusively because they were a top shelf defense and they could rely on that night in, night out. The offense was hit or miss a lot of times last season, but they could win some absolute rock fight games because they could force a team into 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute plus scoring droughts, right? Where they might not be getting any points up on the board, but damn sure the other team's not getting any points up on the board either. That element of the defense has been sorely missing this season. And to Ben's point about lower floor, higher ceiling, I do think you see that in effect against certain teams, right? Where sometimes they're able to tap into that defensive identity a little bit, and they have the elevated ceiling simply because when you roll out Kevin Durant and Alperen and Sengun as two of your offensive weapons, you can get by and do a lot of things offensively, even when it doesn't look great, even when the process isn't the best. You can kind of get by on sheer talent alone with those two guys. So I do think this Rockets team on paper, right, the numbers offensively for the season, right, number 4 in offense, number 7 in defense, it doesn't feel like it. Like, those numbers don't match the eye test when watching this team. They don't feel like a top 5 offense. They don't feel like a top 7 defense at times. And maybe that's just because we watch, entirely too much Rockets basketball, and we're able to sit here and nitpick and get really aggressive with our analysis. But it really does feel like this team is missing something, which is why we're starting this conversation with the coaching side of things. Now, I do want to transition here and talk about the offensive side of the ball, because we haven't spent much time on that. Ben, you kind of teed us off a little bit already with kind of the Reed Sheppard part of this discussion. And I think that's where Ime has found himself in a lot of hot water as of late, is his stubbornness, his inability, his inflexibility when it comes to giving, I guess, more of an opportunity to Reed Sheppard. Now, I know that Madison and I were having a discussion about this the other day, so I actually want to let him tee off his thoughts on the Reed Sheppard discourse surrounding his role and Ime Udoka's usage of Reed Sheppard. Yeah,
so for me, I think it's a delicate balance. We've talked about this before with Ime Udoka. With you have this young player with this incredible talent, but there's still some areas that need some smoothing out. Now, Reed has the capabilities with his incredible hands, with his high IQ, right, to make plays on that end. We saw that in the Spurs game. He was probably our best defensive player in the fourth quarter. in that Spurs game. And I think Ime Udoka sees that potential in Reed and needs him to match that with the consistency, right? And I think one of the greatest tools coaches have to make those points to especially talented young players is to limit their minutes when they're falling short in those areas. And for me, I think he's taking more of a patient approach to Reed, and also protecting him in a sense. Because if Reed Sheppard is the guy getting hunted on every play in the fourth quarter and he doesn't meet that challenge, right? I think this conversation will be more about Reed Sheppard's defense that we're having right now, rather than Ime Udoka's inability to put him into the lineup, right? And so it's a crux of those two things. And so I think Ime Udoka's looking for Reed to make plays defensively so he can extend those minutes, right? And then we see that offense going. And then we get to see Reed shine when he is playing well. And when we are, so we kind of have this rosy-eyed view of this. But for now, I think Ime is taking the right approach. You don't want to ruin this guy, but you do want to teach him a lesson, right? And I think it's a long season, 82-game season. And over the course of the season, Reed will be able to make those type of plays more consistently, which will warrant that opportunity. He'll earn those minutes, right? And I think as Rockets fans, we all understand the Silas era and unearned minutes and how that can affect young players, right? And so on that, I side on the side of caution, right? This is an incredible talent. It's not about just this year. It is about the development of this guy over the course of many years. This is a potential superstar we have on our hands, and you want to be able to unleash him. But I'm hoping that, putting him through the ringer earlier in the season will allow him to be better for later in the season and for the playoffs.
So I understand the idea of it being a delicate balance. I think one thing that a lot of Rockets fans struggle with is when you have sometimes the success of the Reed Sheppard minutes juxtaposed with, as of late, right, in the last few weeks, right, juxtaposed with the inherent struggles of the Jabari Smith Jr. minutes. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, well, where is, why is the leash so short for one player versus another player? Even when you go into it further to identify that, there's stretches where Jabari Smith Jr. has been targeted defensively, right? Certain teams have really had their way with Jabari this season. So it's not like he's, complete Teflon on defense to where he's always a plus defender and, never a defensive liability, this kind of thing. And then when you couple that with some of his offensive struggles as of, recent times, that's where you get into this whole, okay, well, Ime Udoka and his mentality, he's always going to lean that defense first player, even if it's not accurate, even if it's just, okay, the perception that this player is a good defender and they have a reputation for being a good defender. So you're going to lean further into that as opposed to trusting what the numbers say or trusting the eye test of, hey, this team is a more dynamic team offensively with Reed Sheppard on the floor. B. Scott, how do you feel about the Reed Sheppard kind of situation and how Ime's using him so far?
I actually want to start by saying shout out to Madison for talking me off the Reed Sheppard ledge. I mean, that was a compelling case, a compelling argument, and credit where credit is due, man, because I'm on the other side of it. I'm on the extreme and have been on the, give Reed Sheppard all the minutes, start Reed Sheppard, lean all the way into everything about it, both the good and the bad, and the reason why I am that way is because I feel like the positives just far outweigh the negatives, or the upside far outweighs the downside. And so I'm willing to live with some of these pitfalls or some of these holes in his game, I think a little bit more than somebody who's way more invested in it being his job, that being Ime Udoka. So I could understand why it's so easy for me to say, just put Reed Sheppard in the game, right? Because I want to see the potential. I want to see the investment. But I think you raised some really good points, Madison, about this delicate balance that they're doing. Here's the part that's frustrating about it, though, and the redeployment. On ball and off, let's just focus offensively for a second. On ball and off ball, I feel like he's a top three, just offense here, top three player on the team. On ball and off ball. And they struggle. They struggle so mightily in the half court setting, where just, to me, somebody that offers the kind of skill set and the upside that he offers you is just too it's too enticing and honestly too beneficial to you as a team to just kind of leave it over there on the bench or have a short leash with it. So what are some of the things that we complain about with this offense? Not enough guys move without the basketball when either Alperen Sengun or Kevin Durant or whoever's isoing on a given play, it's usually those two guys. When they have the ball, everybody's just kind of standing around in admiration. Not Reed Sheppard. That's a guy that understands how to move. They are limited outside of those two guys that I mentioned, that, the obvious, Kevin Durant and Alperen Sengun, when they have the ball. Who else can you just give the ball to and say, go get me a bucket? There's a little bit of that with Amen Thompson. I think he's an incredible mismatch when he's getting downhill and he's confident. But then outside of Durant, Sengun, and a little bit of Amen, there's not a lot of guys that you can just give the ball to and say, go give me a bucket. Why is that important? Because it's not like you're really running offense that, just kind of includes everybody. They have these rare possessions where like 4 or 5 guys will touch the ball and everybody's like, Eureka! It's like the first time we've ever seen anything like it, as Rockets fans. And so
like man discovering fire. It's like, oh, this is what it can look like.
What? So to the point of Reed, like he can do those things. You are either lacking or just not necessarily good enough in those areas. And so just want to see more of the kid. But I think Madison, though, raises some really, I think, fine and fair points about the delicate balance, especially the part about overexposing him. I couldn't agree more with the point that you made of, and this is where I kind of have to check myself, right? It's like, okay, I'm criticizing Udoka, but if when Reed's out there getting cooked, and we've seen plenty of it, we've seen some good Reed defensive minutes, but we've seen a lot of him getting cooked. Whenever that happens, it's, oh my God, it's the, Reed's got to improve, Reed's got to get better at defense and all that kind of thing. So there is a delicate balance in that conversation, but I still lean toward just leaning all the way into this Reed Sheppard experience because, look, man, just to me, the opportunity cost is too great.
Coming up, we keep our midseason conversation rolling along. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why GameTime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. You can pull up the GameTime app, pick an upcoming NBA game, and have tickets within minutes. It truly is that simple. The all-in price upfront is my favorite feature on GameTime. No surprise fees at checkout. They are fully transparent from start to finish. They also have zone deals for you to take advantage of, so be on the lookout for those. Great last-minute ticketing options. So take the guesswork out of buying your NBA tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the GameTime app today, and remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Let's go ahead and dive into the final part of our conversation for this portion of our Rockets midseason review.
I do wonder if maybe in the grand scheme, the Steven Adams injury becomes a blessing in disguise for this offense. Not because they're better without Steven. Absolutely not. Steven is a wonderful player. But I do feel like just from a 30,000-foot view perspective, this team became so dependent on the offensive rebounding formula that I think they haven't always been as dialed in as they should be from an X's and O's standpoint. They've sort of fallen back on the crutch of, well, even if we miss, we can just crash the offensive glass. And let's be clear, for this Rockets team to have any chance of contending for a title this year, they need Steven Adams to come back. So hopefully he will. And assuming he's healthy, Steven's accomplished enough in the league. He does what he does. And so if he gets back by the playoffs, they can drop him in, and in his minutes, he's going to be the same guy, assuming he's healthy. So I want to make clear off the jump, I'm not saying they're better without Steven Adams. Absolutely not. But I do think that maybe this stretch without Steven will force them to go, back to the basics in terms of half-court offense and figure out, what plays and what players in terms of what lineups you use give you the best chance to generate good offense. Because I do feel like the double big was so successful late last season and for the most part early this season that it's just been sort of a Band-Aid that even if they had these half-court issues, that could clean up. It would give you a chance. And obviously they have enough talent to win at a high level. Well, now without Steven, you're going to have no choice but to trust some of these younger guys a bit more. And that may leave Ime Udoka no choice but to to trust Reed Sheppard a bit more, get him some high leverage reps, and we'll see where it takes us. But I think in the grand scheme, it comes down to offense versus defense. It's about trade-offs. And that's why I do see a little bit of overlap between the defensive discussions we had leading off and now getting into the offense. If you're going to sit Reed for developmental purposes in terms of the big picture that Madison was getting at, I'm understanding of that to a point. However, I need the defense to be better than 7th overall and 10th in January. That's the thing. So many of these issues offensively would be, if not fixed, significantly improved with Reed closing games. You know, it was so telling the other night, late in the Philly game, when there was the Maxey goaltend that wasn't called, and they had that inadvertent whistle a few seconds later. I was actually hoping, and I know they couldn't because they didn't call it a goaltend on the fly. I was actually hoping that they would call the goaltend and give the Rockets the ball down 2 with 6 seconds left, because I had more confidence in KD hitting a walk-off 3 like he did against Phoenix than I did their ability to win in overtime, where they're 1-5 this year. Like, their offense in those situations is just so predictable. And I also did not think that Ime was going to trust Reed Sheppard defensively, and the result was what it was. And I just think that's so fitting that at least I'm at that place where I just have zero confidence in them in those situations, especially without Reed. And if they're a dynamic defensive unit, I can make peace with it, but they're simply a pretty good to good defensive unit, and I just don't think the trade-off is worth it there.
You know, when we start looking at offensively for this team, I will say that's where I was happy to actually hear. Maybe not happy is not the right word. I felt vindicated to hear B. Scott give his grade of C+, because that's actually where I was coming from too with my Ime Udoka grade, just because if you'll remember, right, when we did our roundtable previous to the start of the season, right, coming in, our preview, all that, one of the things that, you know, we discussed was the fact that whatever the offense looked like this season under Ime Udoka, with the benefit of having, you know, one of the greatest players to ever touch a basketball in Kevin Durant, an offensive phenom like Alperen and Sengun, the right role players to plug in around those guys. Now, I will say, the caveat of this team has been far from healthy, obviously, right? The significant loss of Fred VanVleet, other guys in and out of the lineups all season, right? DFS and Tari, Eason, 2 of your most important role players on both sides of the ball, have been in and out of the lineup all season. DFS is still technically ramping up, right? He's still under the minutes restriction to begin with. Now you lost Adams. So
he's off the John Wall ramp, at least.
Oh, not the John Wall ramp. Oh, man.
It was the John Wall ramp until Christmas.
Oh, my.
Anyways, so what I will say is I still think that there have been more than enough weapons at Ime's disposal for the offense to not look as bad as it does at times. Like, I think one major takeaway is just they don't ever generate like what feels like easy buckets. Like, so much of the offense feels like pulling teeth, to that point that B. Scott made earlier, where sometimes it's like you have these rare possessions where they, have the initial action, downhill, paint touch, spray out to the 3-point line, swing, weak side, and then open bucket. And you're like, how did that happen? Let's do that. Like, can we do that like 30 more times a game? It'd be incredible, right? Then the offense would actually feel good. We've talked over the years a lot, especially back during the rebuild era, but like, what does the process for this team look like? The process has looked absolutely awful at times. The numbers have resulted in them being the 4th best offense in the NBA, which I still don't fully agree with, but the process just feels so bad at times. And that's where I really do think that I would have hoped to see a little bit more creativity, some more imagination from Ime Udoka offensively. We talk all the time about how stagnant things feel with Kevin Durant isolating and Alperen Sengun isolating. It really does feel like the offense at times is just give the ball to one of those two guys, let their talent win the possession. And the good news is their talent wins you a lot of possessions, right? So you can kind of get away with that. But good defensive teams are going to be able to sniff that out. And that's the frustration, is now you have this offense that is entirely too predictable. Sometimes it just wins based on talent alone. And you have the defense that hasn't been up to snuff, or at least up to its usual standards under an Ime Udoka-led team. And you get kind of some of the disappointing results that we've seen so far this season. I feel like we talked a lot about Reed Sheppard in here. Do we want to go ahead and get our Reed Sheppard grades out of the way, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, Madison, I'll let you start us off on the Reed Sheppard grades and any additional thoughts you have about kind of where Reed is at as a player at this point.
Yeah, right now I got to give Reed Sheppard. Okay, coming into this season, if I give him a grade to what he's supposed to be coming into this season, I think he's knocked it out of the park. A+, right? What Reed Sheppard was supposed to be was backup point guard to run up our backup minutes and prove that he's a rotational piece. I think he's far and away exceeded that. Now, slide in Fred VanVleet injury, right? Maybe you might argue that as a starter, right? And I think with his defensive limitations, and now that I understand, now that we know that Reed is a staple and we can see his potential, I think I have to reduce that to probably a B+ or an A-, right? And just and literally just off the defense, and then there's still some young player plays, knucklehead mistakes that he makes here and now and again. Untimely turnovers, which I think the whole team has a problem with that, but Reed has a problem with that as well. And as a point guard, as a floor general, which is the hardest position to learn in the league, right? I think, giving him grace on that, I still think he deserves probably an A- for what we expected him to be coming in. So that's where I'm at with it.
Ben?
I'll go B. I can't put all the blame on Ime Udoka because we've talked about the strengths he has offensively, but he's not closing a lot of these games, the Pistons game excluded, because Ime Udoka does not trust him enough defensively. And while I would like Ime Udoka to have a little bit of a longer leash, some of that is on Reed for not doing enough to build that trust. So by and large, it's still a good season, and I'm hopeful that the grade can be higher by the end. But when you see these gifts offensively and he's not able to convince the coach, even in the absence of Fred VanVleet and without a point guard on this roster, that he's worthy of being in that closing lineup, I can't put it all on Ime Udoka. Some of it's on Reed. I'm not going to kill the guy, but that's why I'm going B instead of A.
Yeah, I'm going to go B+. So right in between them, I guess right in the middle of you two. I just think that the defense, I mean, think about it like this, guys. And I don't mean to throw this guy under the bus or sound like I'm talking bad about him, but I mean, we had that stretch there a couple of weeks ago where J.D. Davidson was given the more favorable minutes. And that is an indictment on Reed. You know, you can disagree with Ime Udoka's decision to do that to begin with, and we can, that's its own discussion and debate. But the fact that that's how a legitimate NBA head coach felt about what is clearly, we all agree, is a legitimate NBA player in Reed Sheppard, that he goes and trusts J.D. Davidson, who I'm not going to call an illegitimate player, but a borderline NBA player, right? I want to be respectful, because getting it out the mud, doing what you're doing on a Rockets. Look, I want to respect the guy, but he shouldn't be playing over Reed Sheppard. Under any circumstance ever, unless Reed Sheppard, knock on wood, is injured or they just have to go to that should never happen. So I think that right there is an indictment to where it can't be an A. But the dude's really good, man. His best games, I was just talking to him about this the other day, man. His best games that you can remember are against some of the best teams, right? If you go last year against Oklahoma City, and then this year against the Warriors, who are not, Jackson, you and I were talking about this the other night. The Warriors aren't the Warriors, but they're still the Warriors. And then you've got the San Antonio game. You've got the Denver game. You got a handful of examples.
Pistons game most recently, right?
Pistons game, there we go. Pistons game most recently. You got a handful of examples there. Where, again, we were talking about this where the numbers weren't great, but if you watch the game, they don't win the game without Reed Sheppard's third quarter. So he impacts winning. He's an excellent player. He's just still got a lot of work to do. I think on the defensive side, obviously, but also as a floor general. Madison mentioned some of the turnovers, which you also fairly point out. That's a theme with the team overall. But he's got an even greater responsibility as someone that is supposed to have the ball in his hands as often as he does. So I'm gonna go B+ on Reed Sheppard.
I think I'm right around that range. I think I'm going to go, I'll lock in at probably A- just because he played so few games last season. He's effectively still a rookie. By total games played, he is still a rookie at the NBA level. And to see him as a rookie playing within the context of a team, or, the construct of a team that wants to win and play high level championship level basketball, that is a ton of pressure. Those are some pretty lofty expectations and a lot of weight on a very young player. And I think he's handled it pretty admirably up to this point with, as far as those expectations and being able to find his spots, alongside, talented offensive weapons like Kevin Durant, like Alperen Sengun. And there have been some games where he's been, for stretches, sometimes the Rockets, there's been stretches where Reed Sheppard's been the best player on the floor for the Rockets, where like legitimately he has single-handedly won them a quarter or won them a game or turned the tide in a given game. And to me, that level of talent is so hard to come by. It's so rare. And when you see it, like, I think we see those flashes and we all just kind of collectively know, right? If you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, you just see those moments from Reed Sheppard and you're like, oh, like that's a guy that has star potential, right? That, like, these are things that star players do when they're young and they're figuring it out in their rookie and sophomore seasons. And then when it all clicks and the consistency is there, then you're like, oh, we have a star on our hands. Like that's the beauty of it, right? We're seeing these early kind of moments from Reed Sheppard. I'm at that A- range because the offensive ceiling is obviously there. There have been stretches where, he does struggle offensively, right? And there are some moments where I think some of those shortcomings in his game, right? There's moments where he picks up his dribble at the wrong time, or some of those ill-advised passes, like the one that he tried to send to a Thompson, the really rushed alley-oop attempted lob that just smashed off the backboard and went flying out of bounds the other game. Like, there's some really, really rough moments with Reed, right? He has taken those the ill-advised logo 3-pointer early in the shot clock, like little, kind of youthful moments from him in that regard. But I am a little where I come away still with the kind of the frustration, I guess, or the disappointment in how the Rockets have been utilizing him is I get it. I understand some of the defensive stuff. I get it. I just think that by and large, he wins his minutes when he's on the floor. And for this team to be able to get to make any kind of noise this season, right? They're going to need Reed Sheppard to be able to unlock the highest ceiling version of this team. And Ime's, I guess, nature to just want to resort back to or lean on a defensive identity, right? To lean on guys like Josh Okogie or Jayshawn Tate or a JD Davison, right? Who I think we agree, right, is probably still the best, overall point guard on the roster, which is a bit of an indictment on Reed himself. But it's Ime's nature to want to lean on that side of things, the defensive side, as opposed to just saying, hey, well, we can raise our offensive ceiling. And even though our defense is only kind of, top 7, top 10-ish, right? If we can lean further into a better offensive identity, right, then we can get by on being a top 7, top 10 defense and be a top 3, top 2 offense by raising that overall ceiling. And that's where I think there's a bit of a disappointment for me with Ime as it relates to Reed Sheppard. Even being able to acknowledge, though, that Reed absolutely has to improve considerably on really both sides of the floor, right? There's still moments where, even offensively, right, there's some shortcomings there. Talked about like him picking up the dribble, the bad passing at times, but he's so clearly a player that thrives on like confidence. And when he's playing confident, right, it's like he's a different player out there. When he's playing the confident brand of Reed Sheppard basketball, the little hezzy move on Cade Cunningham the other night, some of the different plays that he even thinks to attempt, right, attacking, getting downhill. I really didn't expect Reed Sheppard to be, a threat to score at the rim hardly at all. But now he's realizing that he can use his 3-point shooting gravity, that when teams are overplaying him out on the perimeter, he can get by defenders. He's sneaky, quick, sneaky athletic. Throw one of those ones out there. But it is impressive to see him, kind of start putting together so much of his game. And the more runway that he gets to do that, the better off the Rockets will be in the long run. And that's where I come back to, right, Madison's point about the delicate balance. I understand in theory the delicate balance, but there's a part of me that's just also like, he's so damn good. Just throw him out there. Let them figure it out. They'll get it figured out. That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way to help us grow the show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, and then like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.